They weren't just a family. They built an empire. Behind the sharp suits and flat caps was a world of blood, betrayal, and dirty games. But has anyone ever told the real dark truth behind the Peaky Blinders? Not what you saw on screen. It's time to uncover the secrets no one dared to speak. Because this is no legend. This is reality. If you've seen the TV series Peaky Blinders, you probably have an image of a criminal empire in your mind. Thomas Shelby, the mastermind, the smart man who outsmarts everyone. His brothers, a family army that controls everything from the streets of Birmingham to the British government. But is this image of the gang real? Birmingham, early 20th century. Cobblestone streets, dim gas lights, and a fog that enveloped the city. Men in long coats, leather boots, and hats painted shadows of fear on the walls of the narrow alleys. Whispers echoed in the streets, a name that carried terror, Peaky Blinders. They had their own rules, a world where power was bought with blood and wealth was made from the depths of darkness. On the streets of Birmingham, fights were settled with knives and chains, and anyone who dared to confront them paid a heavy price. With their stylish clothes and unique style, this criminal gang presented an image of a fearsome mafia group. But behind this legendary image, a different truth was hidden. The Peaky Blinders emerged in the late 19th century, and their main activities were gambling, extortion, theft, and betting on horse races. Contrary to what was depicted in the series, they never became a full-fledged criminal empire. Unlike the Sicilian or Irish mafia, their structure was more like a street gang than a coherent criminal organization. Violence was a principle for them, but nothing more. And as for Thomas Shelby, the charismatic leader we see in the series did not exist in the real world. He, like many characters in the story, was a figment of the writer's imagination. In reality, the Peaky Blinders were led by criminals like Kevin Mooney, men who, unlike the series, had no long-term plans for seizing power and were alien to political conspiracies. Street fights, turf wars, and bloody battles for control of the gambling market were the essence of the gang's life. But that's only part of the story. What distinguished the Peaky Blinders from other street gangs was not just their violence and distinctive costumes. They had their own unique ways of extending power, ways that made their name resonate in the streets of Birmingham for decades. In the dark streets of Birmingham, where the police dared not enter and the law had taken on a different meaning, the Peaky Blinders gang knew one principle better than anyone: money brings power, and power means control of the city. But this money did not come from the usual means. Formal banks, stocks, and legal investments had no place in their world. Money came from the darkness, from betrayal, from fear, from the blood that spilled on the asphalt of the streets. Gambling, theft, extortion, smuggling, and betting on horse races were the 5 main pillars of the gang's income, and each had a bloody story behind it. Gambling and betting, the beating heart of the gang. If we were to name the most important source of income for the Peaky Blinders, betting would undoubtedly be at the top of the list. In Birmingham, gambling was not just a pastime, but an illegal industry that could make one person a millionaire and another a pauper. Horse racing was the main hub of this activity, where big money was moved. The Peaky Blinders controlled the business. But how? 1. Control of betting routes. They forced middlemen and bookies to move money only through their own channels. No one could stay in the business without paying a share. Manipulating the results of races, bribing jockeys, threatening judges, or even injuring winning horses was part of their job. Winning in these races was not a matter of chance, but the result of a predetermined game. Extortion of winners. If someone won a large sum of money on a bet, one thing was certain: they had to give a share of their winnings to the Peaky Blinders. Otherwise, it might be the last win of their lives. In one famous case, a man who had won £500, the equivalent of tens of thousands of pounds today, on a big bet thought he could win his money without paying the gang. The next day, he was found in a dark alley with scars that showed he had learned a hard lesson. His money? It had disappeared. Big heists. The art of daylight robbery. The Peaky Blinders didn't just make money by gambling and betting. Sometimes the easiest way to get their hands on the money was to steal it. But these robberies weren't simple and haphazard. Some of them were carried out with a precision that would have amazed even the greatest European bank robbers. One of the gang's most famous robberies was the attack on a money train in the 1910s. The story began like this. A wealthy businessman who invested in racehorses planned to transport a large sum of money in a guarded carriage. But the Peaky Blinders found out about this. They prepared a team of their most skilled men and monitored the carriage's route in advance. One rainy night, as the carriage was passing through a deserted street, the gang members attacked it. Two men with rifles forced the guards to put down their weapons. One man cut the horse's reins so that they could not escape. The others pulled bags full of banknotes and gold coins from the carriage. In less than 3 minutes, they stole all the money and disappeared before the police arrived. The robbery not only pocketed a lot of money, but also made their names even more feared and respected on the streets of Birmingham. Extortion, protection, or threat. In a city where conflict was always possible, having a bodyguard was a bonus. But this protection did not come cheap. The Peaky Blinders extorted money from the owners of shops, bars, and various businesses. If you want your shop to stay safe, you have to pay. If you don't want anyone to be bothered, you better cooperate. If someone refused to pay the gang's share, their shop could be set on fire the next day, their windows smashed, or worse, they could disappear into a dark alley. This was exactly what the Italian Mafia did, but there was one big difference. Comparison with the Italian Mafia. Order versus violence. The Italian Mafia, especially the Cosa Nostra in Sicily, was a very organized and structured organization. They had a hierarchy for everything. A leader, advisors, enforcers, and followed their own rules. But the Peaky Blinders were different. The Mafia had connections with politicians and bankers, but the Peaky Blinders only controlled the streets. The Mafia had long-term plans, but the Peaky Blinders focused more on street fighting and power struggles. The Mafia had its own rules, but the Peaky Blinders followed only one principle. Anyone who stands in the way must be eliminated. Unlike the series, which portrays the Peaky Blinders as a smart and strategic group, in the real world, they were more like a ruthless and violent group whose power depended on fear and street fighting. Every empire has enemies, and for the Peaky Blinders, they were surrounded on all sides. From rival gangs to the police and even the government, everyone wanted to bring them down. But in the Birmingham underworld, these battles were not resolved in court, but in the dark and bloody streets. Street enemies. Gang wars. Birmingham in the early 20th century was a battlefield, with each criminal group trying to grab a bigger share of it. Although the Peaky Blinders were powerful, they were not the only gang on the streets. Sabini Gang. Italian enemies. The Sabini Kings Gang, led by Charlie Sabini, was one of the Peaky Blinders' main competitors in the betting and gambling business. Unlike the Peaky Blinders, who relied more on street violence, the gang had strong connections with the Italian Mafia and even politicians. This gave them more power in London and the south of England. The war between the two groups intensified when the Peaky Blinders tried to take control of part of the London betting market. The suburban kings attacked one of the Peaky Blinders-controlled bars, injuring several of their members. In one famous clash, Sabernini's men suddenly raided the home of a key Peaky Blinders member one night and brutally beat him. The result of this street war was the gradual retreat of the Peaky Blinders from London and their refocus on Birmingham. Sabernini showed that in the world of crime, physical strength alone is not enough, but influence and politics are equally important. Birmingham Boys, a bloody struggle for control of the city. The Birmingham Boys, led by Billy Kimber, were one of the most feared criminal groups of their time. Unlike the Peaky Blinders, who were more of a local gang, the gang controlled illegal betting throughout the UK. They had more men, they had better weapons, and most importantly, they had stronger financial backing. The rivalry turned into a full-scale war when the Peaky Blinders tried to take over some of the areas under the influence of the Birmingham gang. In one deadly clash between the two groups, several members of the Peaky Blinders were killed, and a number of Billy Kimber's men were also killed. In the end, Billy Kimber won the battle and the Peaky Blinders were forced to lose much of their influence. Enemies of the state. Police and Law Street enemies were not the only problem for the Peaky Blinders. The Birmingham police also hated them and were determined to destroy the gang. Birmingham police, hunting the Peaky Blinders. As the gang grew in power, the police were forced to take more drastic measures against them. Undercover investigators entered the neighborhoods under their control as ordinary people and gathered information. In several surprise raids, the main members of the gang were arrested, but due to a lack of sufficient evidence, many of them were released. But the police were not going to give up so easily. They passed stricter laws against illegal betting and street violence, and eventually, the Peaky Blinders gang came under severe pressure. Police and government crackdown, the end of an era. As the Peaky Blinders gang grew more powerful, their enemies became more determined. The Birmingham police, the government, and even rival gangs all united to bring them down. Police actions. The ruthless hunt for the Peaky Blinders. The Birmingham police initially lacked the strength to deal with the gang, but as public complaints and street fighting increased, the government stepped in and began a more severe crackdown. Undercover detectives. The police infiltrated the gang to gather information. Increased police force. Special units were created to deal with criminal gangs. Raids. The police carried out surprise raids on homes and gathering places of the Peaky Blinders. Mass arrests. Over the years, hundreds of members of the gang were arrested and sentenced to long prison terms. As a result, the Peaky Blinders, which once controlled the streets, lost one key member after another. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Peaky Blinders series was Thomas Shelby becoming a powerful politician. But did this happen in real life? The answer is no. In real life, the Peaky Blinders never infiltrated politics. They were more of a street gang than a group with long-term strategies. There is no evidence that members of the gang ever played a significant role in government or politics. Unlike the Italian mafia, which had deep ties to politicians, the Peaky Blinders focused solely on gambling, extortion, and violence. Instead of building a criminal empire with political influence, they engaged in street fighting, which led to their downfall. In fact, the idea that a criminal leader could make it to Parliament is more a figment of the imagination of the show's writers than historical fact. Why did they disappear from history? Many criminal gangs have emerged throughout history, but only a few have lasted. The Peaky Blinders failed to survive and almost completely disappeared in the 1930s. But why? 1. The rise of more powerful gangs. The Peaky Blinders' power declined with the arrival of more organized groups such as the Birmingham and Suburban Kings. These new groups were not only wealthier, but also had greater influence in political and economic circles. 2. Police pressure and stricter laws. The British government passed stricter laws to combat street violence and illegal gambling. The police also hunted down gang members with more modern methods and better trained forces. 3. The changing world of crime. In the following decades, crime moved away from street gangs and became organized underground networks. More modern gangs grew more sophisticated with more secretive methods and corruption in the legal system. Fighting in the streets with fists and knives was no longer an effective way to maintain power. New gangs moved in the shadows and found safer ways to advance their goals with money and influence. The Peaky Blinders, who had retained their traditional and violent methods, were unable to cope with these changes. While the new groups maintained themselves with bribes and connections, the Peaky Blinders continued to depend on bloody fights and street betting. This caused them to gradually lose their power and be unable to maintain their place in the modern criminal world. 4. The disintegration of gang members. As pressure from the police and enemies increased, key gang members were either arrested, killed, or fled. Many of them moved to other cities. Some tried to impersonate new gangs, but they were unable to regain their former power. Some of the remaining members of the Peaky Blinders tried to merge with larger gangs such as the Suburban Kings or the Birmingham gang. But these new groups had their own methods, and the Peaky Blinders no longer had a place in them. For this reason, in the 1930s, the name of the gang gradually disappeared from the streets. 5. Changing society and a decrease in street violence. Over time, England passed stricter laws to combat street crime. The police also modernized their tactics and used intelligence methods to control street gangs. On the other hand, World War II caused the government and society to focus on more important issues. Many men who could have been the next generation of criminals went to war, and street gangs became weaker. During this time, the police were able to suppress the remaining gangs more quickly. By the end of the war, the Peaky Blinders no longer existed. The streets that were once the scene of their bloody clashes were now replaced by a new order. The Peaky Blinders legacy, from the streets of Birmingham to modern legend. Although the Peaky Blinders gang was gone, their name was not forgotten. For decades, older Birmingham residents still told stories about the gang, but most people knew them only as a small gang of criminals, not as the criminal empire that the series portrayed. But after decades of silence, the series Peaky Blinders revived their name. Characters like Thomas Shelby and Arthur Shelby created a different image of the gang, an image of a violent but stylish and intelligent group. But as we have seen, the historical truth was very different from the stories of the series. In the real world, The Peaky Blinders were a violent but loosely organized street gang that was quickly erased from history due to social changes and government pressure. Comparison with modern gangs and mafias today. If the Peaky Blinders still existed today, how would they compare to modern crime groups? The Italian Mafia, still very powerful and have a lot of influence in economic and political fields. Mexican cartels, highly organized and use extreme violence to control the smuggling markets. Street gangs in England. Today, they are more focused on drug and gun trafficking and look less like the classic Peaky Blinders. The truth is that street gangs don't operate like they did in the 19th century. If the Peaky Blinders still existed, they would probably become a more secretive organization focused on financial crimes, rather than a group that walked the streets and started fights. What do you think? Do you believe that a group with this name still exists? Or is the Peaky Blinders just a distant memory? Write your opinion in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss our next videos. And if you like this video, be sure to check out our other videos about criminal gangs and mafia history. Thank you for being with us so far. Until the next video, take care of yourself.